Welcome everybody. We have got quite a few new faces, or well, not new faces, new names this evening. I hardly know anybody, so wherever you're from, you're very welcome. Hopefully you haven't been experiencing Storm Bert in the same way as we have in the UK. But just a quick intro. I first met Steph 3 years ago. I saw a Facebook post that she had put up, and I was fascinated about the rider assessment that she was carrying out for the Ergo 2. So I contacted Steph, and just by chance, there was a meeting in London with Steph, and Maria Hallering was over from Sweden, and from then on I was hooked on the whole process. So I got Steph over to Northern Ireland, and she's been coming over 3 or 4 times a year ever since. And it certainly makes my life a lot easier, sort of teaching the rider biomechanics if I can get the rider in a decent place to start with. But unfortunately, there's certainly a lot of us out there that are struggling with our saddles on a daily basis. So over to you, Steph. I'm very interested to hear this tonight.
I'm just going to ask somebody to let me know when we get to about 20 past. My only clock is on the phone, and I certainly can't see it. So welcome everybody, and thanks for coming along. I'm going to be talking tonight. I suppose I should say who I am. So obviously you had a bit of an intro, but I do call myself a specialist saddle fitter because I've always done specialist brands, and it brings me to particular parts of the market. And yes, 3.5 years ago, I started with Ergo X2 and Maria Hallering, learning so much stuff about rider fit. So I'm going to bring you an overview of that today, why it's important. We'll do a little bit with my lovely customer, Kirsty, who is waiting to come in front of the camera later. And we'll be able to demonstrate a few bits and pieces that may be useful to you, but give you an idea as to why this is so important. I am going to refer you to Equimech on YouTube, because we've got my video that I did, I think in May. It's number 5 anyway. No, it's probably later than that, but it was number 5. And that's about saddle fitting in general, but mainly for the horse. And Lisa's done a brilliant lecture as well on how the rider affects the spine. So those will be quite interesting for you to watch, maybe after you've watched this, and it will give you the context, because there's no point me going over the same ground. So we've got sort of two themes, two big questions. How does rider position help the horse, or how does putting the rider in the right saddle help the horse? And there's a question of why should riders suffer? Now, following on from that is, what do other sports do? Now, I'm very much I'm a classical girl, really. I've competed and I work with people who compete, so I've got customers from all areas. But we have to view it as a sport if we're going to look at really optimizing the rider. And in other sports, we don't expect people to put up with the wrong kit. So things are customized, money is spent, materials are tested, and that just isn't really the case with what we do. We've got this history of saddle making. It's a craft. It's rooted not in science, it's rooted in tradition. So we have this idea that we should all be in these saddles where we can find our position, and we have to work at it, and you should have a year on the lunge. Well, modern life isn't like that anymore. And even back in the day when it was only classical schools really that were training riders, and people were put on the lunge for long periods of time, they still would have benefited from this. So why should we be in pain? Why should we be fighting our kit? And I want to talk to you about when a biomechanics teacher such as Lisa can really help a rider in a lesson, and when it might be the saddle. So rider well-being is absolutely at the heart of this, because if we're not well and if we're in pain, we can't help our horse, on or off. Particularly if we get injured. And I think you all know of Grand Prix dressage riders who exist on a diet of painkillers. So we really, really don't want to be heading in that direction. And then we need to look at how the horse moves. Now, I cover this, Lisa covers this in great detail. So I'm going to move on to the physical forces that we need to look at, because it's the physical forces that affect the rider, affect the horse, affect how the horse moves, affect how the rider can align themselves, and how effectively they can aid. Because if all you're doing is fighting physical forces that are going on around you, you haven't got a lot left for your aiding. And we see what comes from the tension from that in an awful lot of top level riders. There's a huge amount of tension in riders. So physical forces, we need to dissipate the forces that act on us and on our horse. We've got external forces such as centrifugal force going around a corner. How can we better help our horse through a corner through having correct saddle fit? Well, if we don't roll as much, if the saddle doesn't roll as much, if we can stabilize everything, then we're going to be able to resist that much better. It means we can keep our horses much straighter. We have to fight gravity. Gravity obviously has the effect of pulling us down, but then we've got the forces, and I did look this up briefly, spring forces, where things are moving and affecting each other. So we've got compressed soft tissue in the horse. Ideally, that's how they're moving. And we are very much looking at horse and rider in utilizing our soft tissue. We're trying to reduce muscular effort. And I think we can all agree that we see an awful lot of, if you want to call it, leg movers. So we're trying to do the same for the rider to help the horse utilize their soft tissue, the recoil from soft tissue. But that is forces. How do we enable our soft tissue to absorb the forces and to spring where necessary, or to deaden them where necessary? The horse affects how the rider sits, the rider affects the horse. So I want you to think about a warm-up session, perhaps, where you start off in very much horizontal balance. You may do some long and low, you may have whatever you do when you warm up. As the horse comes into more, whether you want to call it collection, or a slightly more vertical balance, or a true horizontal balance where they're not falling forward over their front legs, which is something I think we discussed in the other video, then we need to be able to help them do that. But as they actually come up in front, it changes the balance of the saddle. So the rider's got a different base of support. So you can see the complexity here that horse, saddle and rider affect each other. And we have to take that into account when fitting for both horse and rider. Now, our goal, the gold standard of saddle fitting, as I like to call it, is the 3-point seat, I guess. We go back to Sylvia Locke. We're looking at a neutral pelvis, not in terms of fighting to keep a neutral pelvis, but the saddle should be helping you to obtain and remain in a neutral pelvis. Now, my definition of a neutral pelvis is functional. We can't see the pelvis externally, so I'm looking at how your balance, how your functionality is. And a neutral pelvis allows the spine to stack on top and the discs to do their job. If we're hollow in our back, we compress our discs at the back. If we slouch, we compress our discs at the front. And our shock absorbing mechanism to dissipate those forces coming up from the horse aren't going to work, and the horse is going to find us much more of a dead weight. So we do actually want to sit, and I'm going to grab Percy pelvis. We haven't come up with a better name. We do actually need to sit on the whole of the front of the pelvis. So bring this closer. So we want pubic arch down to the seat bones across the rami. So we want the whole of that triangle to actually be in contact with the horse. And I do get customers who have not really sat on their pubic arch. And I work with them to establish whether it's uncomfortable or just a kind of new sensation. So 3-point seat, vertical, neutral pelvis. Then we need to be over our feet. So this is about the forces bit. And if we're not over our own feet and we are truly sitting, chair seat behind our feet, then we're really not helping the horse. We want the horse to come up. The horse has to come up behind the wither. So we need to be in a supported standing position. And how many people do we see are never going to achieve that in their saddle? We need a stable rider. So stability is absolutely key with everything that we're looking at here with training with the rider. And we are looking at this optimization rather than expecting the rider to expend effort simply on maintaining, and I don't want to call it correct alignment because that's a really static idea, but in the position that best absorbs these forces. If we can get you into this position, we're reducing wear and tear on your body as well as effort. So you're going to be in less pain long term, hopefully, and you're going to be able to aid more easily. You can save the muscles that should be aiding for that job instead of them really hanging on to keep you stable. Now, the other factor, we talked about the horse's balance affecting the rider. The rib cage shape of the horse has a big effect. So some riders will be just too narrow in the hips for a very wide rib cage. A wide rib cage tends to push the leg forward, because you can all imagine you can't both get your leg out and underneath you and curl it under a really wide rib cage. It's going to go forward. So that plays quite a big part of it. Can we change the ribcage shape a little bit when we ride? We can. When we change the posture, we change aspects of that. But we need to look at what is underneath the rider's legs in terms of bulk. We need it to be optimal. It's not only to stop the leg going forward, which might be too much bulk, or going backward, which might be too little bulk, but we also need to get the internal rotation. And saddles can really, really work against you on that. There's a lot of publicity around about everybody should have a narrow twist. Well, if we're fitting to stabilize your skeleton, your pelvis, how wide your pubic arch is determines what sort of twist you need, the shape right on the top of the saddle. And there are other ways that we can get riders a little bit narrower. We can pick the right saddle that allows their leg to drop, that allows that internal rotation. Because if we don't have contact on the inner thigh, we're not helping the horse move optimally. Now, modern saddles, and you really won't see one here at all, but most modern saddles, dressage saddles particularly, because that's where we need to be absolutely over our feet, tend to be pretty deep-seated, high cantles. They may have a high pommel that may relate more to the horse's width or height, or it may not, but they tend to have big blocks as well. Now, what happens here, instead of putting us into a neutral pelvis, where we can still move to aid, we are locked. So our hips are locked. And if you search through my page, you'll find a little graphic with a coloured, drawn out skeleton on it. If you lock one zone of the body, and by jamming the knees back, you're going to do that. You're going to lock up your hips. The high cantle tends to tip us forward from the buttocks, particularly if we drift backwards, because the saddle is not securing us in the right place by that support for the skeleton. So we drift back, we tip forward, the leg closes, the hip angle closes, and of course then we use the blocks, shove the leg back, and we're tight through the hips, we're locked. We can't actually move with the horse. And how often do we see even top riders leaning back in the extended trot, because there is no other way for them to absorb the forces. We can have a debate about whether these trots are correct or not, but we need the rider to be able to absorb that. So what happens is they're actually increasing the forces through part of their body, and we need to reduce and dissipate those forces. So we want this level of ease, we want less effort, and we want the rider to be able to just subtly aid instead of having to hang on for dear life. We want to reduce knee pinching, another thing that can be caused by the saddle, or flappy knees. We have two straight lines for our legs, and we're trying to put them around a round rib cage. So this is not an easy job. We've also got riders wanting, I want to be really close to the horse. And yet we might need some height above the horse to allow the leg to drop. So we need to look at panel design, construction of saddles, even affecting the rider. It's not just about what does the seat look like, what does the flap look like. The construction has a massive part. Is the panel deep enough to lift us up and let us drop our legs? Sitting you on a very close contact saddle on a very wide horse, you get that immediate projection. Your knees are going to go out and forward even more. And Kirsty, I know, she's nodding in the background, can attest to that with her very wide section D. When we look at the skeleton, I do want to clarify, and we've probably gone through this before, that there really isn't a typical male and female pelvis. We see some other characteristics, and I'm going to grab a graphic in a minute, between men and women that are more common in men or more common in women. But forgive me, I think most female-friendly saddles, it's marketing. The outlet shape, which is the bit we're talking about, is the bit on the bottom that we sit on. This is inlet shape, this is outlet shape. Outlet shape has more in common between the two sexes if you took an average male and average female, we'd have a more similar pelvis than the range within male pelvises and female pelvises. Significantly different. It's about a quarter the difference between the average male and female compared to the range of shapes within each sex. And in fact, I think it might be even less than that. So let's not get hung up on that. We need to be assessing the rider, and that does mean not looking at the outside of them. So in terms of trying to understand the pelvis, that is, and the hips, we can tell very little from the outside, which is why I encourage all riders to have a full rider assessment with me, where we actually get an imprint of the pelvis. It's a slightly drawn out process, so I'm not going to try and repeat it today. If you search on my page the word Armoros, ARMAROS, you will find quite a lot on the saddle fitting process, quite a few videos, sorry, on the imprinting process. But we can do some testing to see if a rider is stabilized once we have them in the saddle. So I carry the saddle stand with me. I think it's really useful, and it's very useful to sit riders in saddles before we start riding the horse. Horses can only take so much in the saddle fitting, and riders can start putting on more than 3 saddles and they've lost track. Almost always. It's overwhelming. So we try and do everything we can on the stand first. So I'm just going to grab this one graphic because I know we're about at 20 past. Because I had one question earlier and I thought, well, it is quite a useful one, and it relates to the fact that you can't tell the pelvis from the outside. So this lady says, what do you do for petite riders? And this is related to that and related to gender. So I'm going to bring this up to the camera, and forgive me, I haven't been able to just prepare it well enough for everybody to see. But I want you just to have a look at that. It was a sketch I did earlier. I want you to think about what we do with thigh length and what we do with stirrup bar placement. So S is your stirrup bar, H is your hip, A is the ankle, K is the knee. To get your foot, to get your ankle under your hip, we need to look at how big your feet are and how long your thigh is. And if you have a long thigh, it's going to need to drop more vertically than if you have a short thigh. And short thighs are more common in men relatively, relative to their height, and they tend to have bigger feet. So you can see that the stirrup bar needs to be more forward. So that to me is one of the biggest differences that we might see. Sorry, it's just flaring, isn't it? We might see between men and women. So I hope that's helpful, and I will try and stick that up, certainly on my page. Right. Let me just check that I've covered everything. Apologies for notes. I hate using notes, but so yeah, we are going to move on to look at Kirsty in a minute. So the key things I'm looking at, we need the right shape on top to support the pelvis. Now that is both the triangle, as we've seen, flat. So that's looking at this V. Don't know whether you can see that, but we have a V at the front there. That's the triangle that we need to determine. And then if we turn it sideways, we have the height of the pubic arch. So coupled with the width. So we have quite a lot of things we need to think about here to get the pelvis into neutral. The coccyx doesn't come into it too much. That tends to be people who've got slightly damaged coccyx that are going to need to worry about that. So we need the right triangle for the pelvis on the top, and we need the right rise to the front, and to an extent how much rise at the back as well, because that affects the buttocks. Then we look at what do we have lower down. What do we have through the skirt? This is a treeless, but on a treed saddle, how is the saddle constructed here? How much bulk is there? Can we get that internal rotation? Do we have a gap at the knee? Do we have the knee pinching? Again, remember the 2 straight lines round the rib cage. So they're really important things that we're not always looking at. People do talk about stirrup bar placement. This happens to have 2 under here, set here. That needs to suit the rider, as I just showed you with my rather puny little sketch. So they're the factors I'm looking at. Seat shape, flap, the bulk, the construction, where does it push the leg out, where does it not support the leg, and then that last thing is the bar placement. So when I'm assessing a rider, I will start them off with the sort of assessments, well, some of the sort of assessments that Lisa would do, so the biomechanics coach. I'm not going to be drawing out quite as many conclusions as she would, and I do refer many people to Lisa and other similar coaches, mostly to Lisa, but I've got one or two others for in-person visits if you're close to them. And we'll do things like squats. We'll look at how your body functions in certain movements. I will look at how you stand. I'll look at your habits, what do your feet do? Feet are really important. I know they're not directly saddle related, but the saddle affects what happens to your feet. So I'm going to show you some objective tests that we can do with Kirsty that you can do in your saddle. You can sit in other saddles on the yard. The one thing you will need is some kind of stand that is suitable to sit on. I make mine a little bit wider. You need to mock up a bit more the shape of a horse, because otherwise you're not getting that true reflection of where the leg is going to go. But still, when I get you on a horse, things can change. So yeah, we'll do some testing that you can try yourself. So Kirsty, if you want to come in, yes, we have stool. I think we will start you off in something that I know is wrong. And we're going to put that on. I will pick the camera up at a couple of points and I'll walk round Kirsty so you can see what's going on, well, as much as I can. We might need to move her out a little bit actually, so I can actually move around her. I couldn't move the camera too far away because I don't have a mic, so you wouldn't be able to hear me. So I don't think we'll sit you in that one. I think we'll take that off. So you've probably heard people going, well, just have a good old-fashioned flat open seat and you can find your own place. So let's find fairly open seat. It is a jump saddle, so it's not super flat for a jump saddle. But this is a 17. And Kirsty, you've probably seen her height. You'd realise that she's a 16.5, 17 in terms of her height, traditional fit. So if you want to have a sit on there, I'm going to come round. You're right. Yeah. The balance of the saddle is really important. So where you can, try and get the saddle in correct balance. This brand is meant to be pommel and cantle fairly level. Hopefully you've got a good view there. Now I know this saddle doesn't suit Kirsty, and I can tell by her face because there's a smiling grimace going on.
Really uncomfortable.
Really uncomfortable. Now, if I tell you that Kirsty's own saddle is a 16.5 in exactly the same tree, with exactly the same materials, everything about it is the same apart from the seat size. The flaps are different, which does have an effect. These are fractionally thicker than her flaps. So it's mild, it's tiny. So I want you to see that at the moment, let me move the step. So what we're looking to assess when we look at a rider in the saddle, the stripy jacket really helps, especially from the front and the back. We're looking to see, does the saddle improve your straightness or does it make it worse? We ideally want it to help with your straightness, but there may be other things we need to do for that. It's not always going to come from the seat. And we certainly need to be working on it in terms of exercises. So I can see already Kirsty's just slightly hitching the left shoulders up a little bit. You're probably trying to resist.
I've got no stability in it, so I'm doing anything to try and keep still.
And this is what you'll see. When you put somebody in absolutely the right saddle, you can often see this look and the sternum just kind of lifts a little and you can get a smile. And I've had people even find the right saddle therapeutic. If they've had a bad back, they can sit in the right saddle and it will unravel, or unknot, should I say. So we're going to test 3 things. The first one, I might have to pick up the phone, so I hope this doesn't go wrong. I'm going to come around here and I'm going to give Kirsty a bit of a shove from the side. And I know this sounds, where's the camera at that end, isn't it? Yeah. Really dodgy, but how easily... Yeah, how easily can you resist me? So can you access your own core? You're having to work pretty hard there. So I want you to think about your own horse's rib cage rotation. If you can't resist a little shove from the side, that lined up okay, yeah, looks like it. You can't resist a bit of a shove from the side. How are you going to resist when your horse is stuck in a counter rotation? If your saddle slips to the outside on one rein, your horse is probably stuck with the rib cage lower on the outside, which means they're not going to be straight. They can't come through from behind evenly, and then they can't push up in front. So that might be the first thing we test is, can she access her stabilizer muscles? We can do it without her doing any effort at all. And on the right saddle, sometimes they just don't move very much, even without accessing those muscles. So that's the first, and that's to do with the horse's rotation. Now, the next will be deceleration or decelerative and accelerative forces, i.e., do we get tipped forward? And I know that a lot of us will tip in transitions, maybe. You know, these are the forces acting on us. So I'm going to get Kirsty to do, it is slightly ridiculous on this, but she's going to swing her arms up to her shoulders and drum. And I want you to watch for, as you swing your arms up, there's a tendency to lean back to counterbalance. As you drum, and this is how we do it, it's literally like a whole arm, quite vigorous. You're trying to destabilize yourself. So will you fall forward doing that? So Kirsty, I want you to
just try not to hit your knees.
swing your arms up.
I'm already, doing all kinds of things.
Yeah.
I'm gripping, my knees have come up.
Yeah, so Kirsty's used to working with me. She knows what to look at.
And I'm just swinging around a lot.
Yeah, there's just no stability here. So that's the second test. And we've got, are you going to tip back or are you going to tip forward? We need to look at both of those. Then what have I got here? And yes. So we need to do this one from the front as well. I probably should have sat it the other way around.
Yeah.
But we could go behind. So me, put your hands on your elbows in front of you. Yes. So bent and put your hands flat on your elbows. Have I got you on screen? So I would like you to turn to the side without contorting. So stay in a square. Don't go into a parallelogram. How far round can you go? Can you get any further? Not really. You're having to really work at that. And I'm presuming you're going to have to use your right leg quite a lot.
Jammed in the
You've got to jam in the left leg. Okay. Yeah. And the other way? Better that way, but that shows we all have asymmetries. Although you've actually twisted from your shoulder, just pop your elbow back. Yeah, stay nice and straight. So this is another test that we can do. And this is going to tell us how well we can access. Oh, sorry, I'll get this back on the stand. How well we can access our aiding, you know, lots of stuff that we need to be able to do with our bodies in the saddle. So this saddle definitely doesn't suit her, and I'm presuming it's now getting quite uncomfortable.
Yeah, I've got sore hips now.
Oh, sore hip already. Okay, jump off. And we'll pop that away. And we'll put her in her own saddle. And we have not practiced this. I mean, it was quite a while ago I fitted it for her, so
I haven't grown.
no, but things can change. You know, I should say, my age is very pertinent. I think Kirsty's a little further off, but post-menopause, our bodies change a lot. Our pelvises get narrower. So unfortunately, even if you've had a perfect saddle for many years, that can change. So never rule out that you just might have changed a little bit. Now, let me check the balance of this again. Might be a little bit low. Oh, it's going to be low in front because this is a really wide saddle.
Yeah.
Yes. Because he's a really wide pony. So we're just going to lift it a little bit at the front. And this buck, as we call it, will not replicate how wide he is. Because he's a proper little chunk. That looks better. It's also very interesting to note, I could put two riders with different shaped pelvises in this saddle. One would push the back of the saddle down when they sat in it, and one would push the front of the saddle down because of how their pelvis is looking for support. The first time I saw the front of the saddle disappear under a long high pelvis, I didn't know what was going on. But they're all things that, you know, I've had to learn. and that we need to consider in saddle fitting. Right. I'm seriously praying here. Okay, again, I need to come and check the balance. Oh, I might have lifted it too far in front, actually. Let me just see if I can just pop some weight forward, just see if that, I think you might be a little bit too far off the back on that, actually. Do you feel stable enough? The saddle stable? No.
Yeah.
Well, you don't want any accidents here. Are you sure? Okay, okay. So instability coming from the block rather than the saddle, but instantly your shoulders look more level. So we're seeing better straightness. Your face looks a little more relaxed.
Breathe freely.
So it was affecting your diaphragm. Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. If our body isn't stacked, how can our diaphragm work? We want the horse's diaphragm to work. If we want them to let their diaphragm go, we need to also let ours go. So we need to think about all of these things. So we're going to start with, what did we do first? We did the shove from the side, didn't we? So I'm just going to give you a little shove here. And how easily can you access your core? Yeah, you don't look like you're making half as much
I'm
effort
not making
on
any
that.
effort. So last time
Oh,
I
you're
made
really
a lot of
relaxed.
effort. Yeah,
Yes.
that's quite
So yeah, she's making me work for this. And then I want you to do the drumming. So I want you to swing your arms up and drum again. Shall I move?
Yeah. Yeah.
And hopefully you can see from the side the little signs of instability, but I can see in your face that that's so much easier.
Yeah, because like you were talking about the pelvic.
You might have to shout to the camera.
You get the pelvic support because the seat on this is smaller. I'm just like I've got 3 points of contact, whereas the other one I only actually just had my seat bones and I was just rocking on them. Whereas here I'm forward onto my extra support, so it makes it easier to be able to move.
And you should be seeing things like how well is the knee dropping? How is the lower back sitting? Is the lower back nice and soft? I'm doing objective testing on a neutral pelvis, but you're still going to get visual signs and clues from just watching. So we've done the drumming. We're going to do, I will grab the phone again. In fact, you might even be able to see from the side. Let's just have Kirsty see how far round she can get. Yeah, so I'd say you've gone a couple of inches further.
Yeah, probably.
Give or take. And go the other way. Oh, that's interesting. You did actually go a bit further that way. Yes, yes, we did get you to bring your elbow back. So there just might be a little injury, a little tightness, something going on at the moment, but you're certainly much more functional on that side and everything looks so much more stable. So I'll run through the points we're looking for again. We want neutral pelvis, stacked spine without excess lordosis, which is the hollow back. Kyphosis technically is when we go back there, but too much of a flattened back, we don't want that. We want to be sitting across pubic arch and seat bones. We want the knee to drop so the thigh can go as vertical as possible. Then we can always pad out a bit more. You know, we might go, say if your knee's dropping too much, you might go from a mono flap to a double flap. And again, mono flaps are sold as the solution to everybody, and they're really not. They are a minimal support mechanism. They offer minimal support for the rider under the leg. So if you had very wide hips on a very narrow horse, you're going to really struggle and your legs may well go backwards and you'll be very inclined to tip forward. So when we start lifting the knee a little bit with stirrups, we then have to look at how much support is under the knee. And I'm going to ask Kirsty to jump off. Thank you very much. We might get you in another saddle in a minute, but I'm going to just show you. This is the level of customization that I do on some saddles. So when we lift her feet with the stirrups, her knees just pop out a little bit because of where he's so wide. So we're not going to get her whole leg draped around. So we support the knee, because if your knee is unstable, your knee should be stable. I talked about the mobility of the hips before, not locking them in a deep seat. Well, if the hips become locked, what happens? The knee gives. The knee has to start mobilizing, which is not, knees are not designed to be mobile, particularly when we've already put them in a really awkward position. So we need a little bit of support under the knee. And because of where her pony's widest point is, Kirsty's lower leg can just drift back a little bit because he drops away. So you're trying to aid and you can only contact the horse further back. So a tiny bit of support under the bottom of the flap, and that changes that quite significantly. So I am going to talk briefly about where we want to put the rider on the horse and how the saddle contributes to that as well. So we talked about all the basic design elements that you could apply to almost any saddle. I will talk about the construction. So even though this is a 2-flap saddle, there's no extra seaming here. There's no bulk. Where you've got the flap attached to the panel, you might get a bit more bulk. And having too much bulk under the thigh can push the leg away. But quite a lot of riders struggle with stability because there isn't enough in this sort of area under the skirt. And that's going to it may cause pinching knees. Because if you're trying to make contact with your thighs, as a lot of biomechanics trainers should be teaching, that you want a nice soft contact on the thigh, then if you haven't got support here, you're going to end up pinching with your knees. So it's not always the rider's fault. We definitely need to be working on the rider as well, but there's a few more examples of where it's the saddle's fault. So the last thing I want to talk about, as I say, is an aspect of these saddles and a few others. Where do they sit the rider, and how can we tell what sort of saddle it is in terms of where it sits the rider? So we want the horse to be able to push up, and it needs to push up at the base of the wither. That is the crucial place. And where are they best placed to carry us? At the base of the wither. Because the thoracic sling, which is the muscles sort of inside the shoulders that help everything come up in front, and when we lift a horse's back, we shouldn't be lifting particularly through the lumbar, certainly not yet. The main thing is that we need to push up in front, and that's how to healthily carry a rider. So we need to sit you at the base of the wither. Now that means a relatively forward balance. You get forward, mid, rear balance. But if we were to sit you back here, and you can have a forward balance saddle that's out of balance, it's going to sit you back there. So that's another factor. It's got to be in the correct balance. But if you're sat further back, then you're on the wider part of the horse. So your knee will get pushed further forward. You are definitely sat more over the end of the psoas muscle, which is one of those tricksy little stabilizing muscles in the pelvis. It attaches under the back half of the saddle. If we can load you further forward, that would give the horse more freedom to control its own pelvis. And a lot of the tightness we see behind the saddle can be from the saddle tipping back because it will put too much pressure on the psoas. So maybe it's not about the rib, the kidneys. Certainly it makes more sense to me. And we don't have definitive answers on this. It's all our best current understanding. So if we can sit you here at the base of the wither, the horse can carry you better. We can get you closer to the stirrup bar, so it's easier to get you over your feet. If we put you in a big seat size or a rear balance saddle or both, you're further behind the stirrup bar. So then how do we place the saddle on the horse's back? And I go into this a little bit in my previous lecture, that the saddles have to be designed to be placed a little bit further forward to utilize getting the rider where they should be. And so there are different ways of fitting a saddle. For pleasure riders, not asking too much of their horse, sitting you a bit further back, having front gussets that take the weight all the way to the front of the saddle. Rider's weight is designed to be spread as far as possible. That's going to have to be placed back behind the shoulder blade. And I'm sure you all know about the shoulder blade needs to be able to move. But then we get these other designs. So this saddle is sort of freed off at the front here. There's very little pressure around the back of the shoulder blade, around the trapezius. So we can place it a tiny bit further forward. The treeless saddles also, because they have a flexible panel at the front here that moves, it can go over the shoulder blade. So some saddles are designed, it's tipping down a little bit, isn't it? They are designed to get the rider to the base of the wither. So we can look at where's the deepest part of the seat relative to the stirrup bar. Where's the deepest part of the seat relative to the widest part? Where's the widest part relative to the pommel? The more forward everything is relative to the seat size, then it's highly likely that you're designed to sit at the front. And what happened with Kirsty sitting in the bigger saddle is that her seat bones actually sought the width. They need that width because she has a wide pelvis. So she goes backwards, she goes slightly into anterior tilt. It's uncomfortable, she's trying to find support. For me, I am 5'8". I think I was 5'9" before. I can't believe I'm shrinking. And I'm a little heavier than I was when I was riding. I'm a 14, 16 now. I was a 12, 14 when I was riding. But I was always put in a 17.5. And they were always traditional English saddles, which have a more rearward balance point anyway. And I struggled to get over my feet. And I was always uncomfortable because I have a wide pubic arch. When I do my imprint, it's not a pointed triangle like this, which you can imagine from some pelvises you might get that. Mine's quite a U. I've got quite a wide pubic arch at the front, and it was incredibly painful. So I sat in posterior tilt, so with a flattened back, and I collapse my shoulders, and I look at photos of myself riding, and I'm kind of ashamed, but I now know that I was always put in a 17.5. It's got the widest part quite a long way back. It's quite a long way from the stirrup bars. But have a think about that diagram that I showed you, my sketch, with the shorter thigh. It wouldn't necessarily be such a problem. If their pelvis is the right shape for the saddle, then being in a larger seat size and with that bar further away might be absolutely spot on for them. It does mean that we have to think about how do we spread the rider's weight if we're putting them in relatively smaller seat sizes on some occasions to give them that wider base of support. Oh, now I've lost my chain of thought. I've done quite well going through yours without losing it. So, yes, in terms of where you sit, it is about pain. It is about support. We do need some people that need a higher pommel. I don't. I need quite a low pommel. I have a short, wide pelvis. But saddles have affected me hugely in my riding career. It's a long time since I've ridden, but yeah, as soon as I got one of these at a 16.5, I sat in it and just knew I'd kind of come home. So I'm going to just have a check of my notes. I don't know what time we're at, Lisa. How are we doing? Got to. Oh, it's almost like I've planned it.
Okay.
I mean, check. I haven't missed anything else. I'm pretty sure I have covered everything, but I am hoping that there will be some questions. I've got other saddles I can put Kirsty in if people are interested. But yeah, I guess it's over to Q&A. Who would like to ask something?
Does anybody want to just put something in the chat, or you can unmute yourself, whatever?
Sorry, just turning you up.
What issues do people have with their own saddles? I know certainly whenever I would have been certainly competing at a lot higher level than I am now. So whenever I was doing a lot of dressage for eventing, I far too much sitting trot was definitely not comfortable. So it's amazing, you know, how much we would suffer just because you thought that was just how it was supposed to be.
Yeah. And we see even things like riders who tend to, you know, pull the heel up and cling on, you know, so often that's partly related to the saddle. And we might see one side clinging on because the saddle can't resist the rotation. So they'll end up with one leg clinging on, trying to hang on. And again, if we give a better base of support, that will improve. But I will say that a lot of the saddles that allow the rider to sit in a really good place don't have so much intrinsic stability. Hence, we need to work on horse saddle rider. Catherine's asked if I can put Kirsty in some different saddles. So let me have a look.
Put the external rotation, is that right? Really wide.
No, the widest one.
It was like wide under.
Was it a ghost?
They were jumping. So I thought it was that.
I don't think so. We can try. This is 17, so it's going to be similar to what you. So this is the same as the jump saddle that Kirsty sat in before in terms of the seat, but the flaps are bulkier.
Yeah.
So we'll just see what this does. Yes, this is padded as well. So the skirt is padded as well. Forgive me not putting it in correct balance. It might be a bit off. But I'm hoping that shows that Kirsty's knees have gone the furthest forward.
It's my knees go forward and it puts me in external rotation. It really pushes your knees out away from
Yeah,
the
so
saddle.
it's really pulling on the inner thigh.
It gets very uncomfortable.
Yeah, you can jump off that one. So again, if you're watching this replay, you can go back, you can have a look at that brown jump saddle. Exactly the same seat, but a wider flap, thicker flap. So this is double padded. Perfect on a smaller rib cage. Really long thighs. Yeah, and this is where we need to look. So let's address that. So you've got really long thighs, they always come over the front. You're probably starting to realize this is not just about how the flap is cut. So if we just keep providing a more and more forward flap, which I will say is better than putting you in a bigger seat, you probably gather the dangers of putting you in a bigger seat. If you have a wide pelvis, you're almost certainly going to slide back to the wider part. In terms of length, well, it's about fitting the pelvis, Catherine. So it's actually the amount of space at the back may not be a problem until we get the rider into movement. We get them on the horse and get the horse moving. The length of the saddle is actually fine. And if you think about it, the weight being forward, in theory, particularly with that curved panel shape, let me get it out again. We could even fit this beyond the back rib. I've never had to do it because they are so short. But no, seat length is just not an issue to me. It's where are they sitting and are they comfortable? Are they stable? So the old seat size arguments just don't stand. So we were just talking about knee and long thigh. So I have a blog post, which is a lady she's only 5'6". She's been told she's got a long femur. She hasn't. I'd say she's actually got a short femur. She was in an 18-inch jump saddle and her knees came over the front. And she was incredibly frustrated. When I went out to her, she had a very short, very wide pelvis. And as soon as I put her in a 16, so an inch smaller than this, her knees dropped. And it is that width under the pelvis supporting the ligaments as well. If all of that isn't supported, then other bits, they'll hang on, other bits hang on, and the hip closes and the knee comes forward. So it's quite an art, and you absolutely need to work from first principles. Ideally to know the shape of your pelvis, to look at how your hips function, which is what I do when I'm testing the rider, not on a saddle, but just on the buck. And we look at what do we need to do to get your knee to drop. Because if we can get your knee to drop, we can get your foot underneath you more, which even in a jump saddle, we want your foot relatively back. Not as far as in dressage. We don't want them way out in front of you. So have a look at my blog post. It goes through all of those issues. But you've seen what happens when I put Kirsty in a bigger seat. Her knee goes forward more. So giving her more space made it worse. And that is so common and so frustrating. So I will put her in a different brand now, because these are fitted differently in terms of how we look at the seat. So this is a ghost treeless. And I just need to set it up very quickly. We want a bit of padding under the front. So this is again something I focus on in the other saddle fitting talk, that there are so many different ways to fit a saddle. And yes, there are a few maybe universal principles. The main one is, does your horse move well in it? Can we stabilize the rider? Again, stability. Nobody talks about stability. Can we stabilize the rider? And does the horse go well? Yes, there are other things we're looking for to make sure it doesn't cause problems in the long term. This particular brand is treeless. This is the most rigid version, but they are not designed to take weight on the cantle. They do not have a tree, so they do not spread weight. So I absolutely need for Kirsty to be sat towards the front of the saddle. So we'll just get her into this one. If I remember correctly, this is okay for you.
Yeah.
We found it quite comfortable, I think.
Surprising.
Yeah.
I mean, 'cause it looks like a big
Now.
flat
Yeah.
nothing, but
Yeah.
actually, because you make a nice contact with it, it's
Yeah.
reasonably comfortable.
Yeah, and hopefully everyone can see that your knees dropped a little better. This is effectively a 16.5, but it's a 16.5, 17. They only do 3, 16, 17, 18. So this is sort of a 17. But let's have a look. Yeah, we don't have any weight on the cantle. So we don't want weight on cantles anyway. Imagine if you've been kicked up by steep rise to a high cantle, and then you go into your extended trot and you have to lean backwards. Now, physical forces, leverage. Our upper bodies, I haven't actually mentioned this, our upper bodies are about 1 meter high. And this is why we get so much rotation in the rib cage, is because if we go with the saddle, if the saddle goes and we go with it, we can't resist it. We are a huge lever on that horse's back, causing that rotation to become more and more. So we really need to think about the effect that we have on the horse when we're right up here as well. But leverage on the cantle, and a high cantle often has big gussets out the back to try and support it, to try and reduce the leverage. But now we see for short backs, we have high cantles and really short panels. If you know physics, you know it's going to rotate over the back. So knees out more than on our own saddle. Yes, I think so. I would normally be standing back, taking photos so we can really judge it objectively, and I would go through them all afterwards because there will be things I'll miss. But yes, we've got a bit more external rotation here. I know for some people, the panels, I talked about the construction. So the panel runs along here and has a bit of bulk. We are looking at options just to see if we can chisel those down a little bit, because that will push the leg out and forward. But yes, it does put her in external rotation. And your back looks pretty good. I mean, you could try the drumming. Let's see what happens with the drumming. Somewhere between the two.
You get a little bit more contact with the thigh,
Yeah,
than on the other side. So it gives you a little bit more, but
yes.
not as much.
Yeah, so the stability is slightly coming from the wrong place here, but it's coming from the bulk under the thigh. Sometimes when we get the knee to rotate in a little bit more, we do need that support under the knee as well. Essentially what we're looking for is a really solid contact from the knee right the way up and over. Knee to knee needs to feel, and it's amazing if I come along, I'll sometimes put my hand under that part of the saddle and go, how does that feel? And they go, oh yeah, even just sitting, they can feel that level of stability. So it all matters. And yes, this wouldn't be completely ideal for Kirsty, but I will say the softer the saddle, i.e. if we're going in the treeless direction with flex, if your horse has a higher wither or a more curved back, you're going to get a slightly different shaped seat than if you were putting one of these on a flat back. So it's quite different to fitting a treed saddle, because they will retain their shape, whatever type of back you put them on. You'll just get the change in the bulk down here from the shape of the rib cage. And it does affect the rider as you widen or narrow a tree a little bit. So any more questions? Any other saddles you'd like to see, Kirsty? We've probably only got a couple of minutes left. The narrowest one would probably be the Grande. Do you want to have a sit in that? I don't want it. So we don't really have anything very. No, I don't have narrow twist saddles because an actual narrow twist on the top doesn't suit the horse. That's the place they need to push up. So a narrow twist from the tree is not going to work very well. So this will feel the narrowest out of all of them. And I didn't see that question.
It was Jamie was asking, is there any possibility of doing a distance fit?
Oh, it's really difficult. I do cover a massive territory, and there are some other people that have got some of the training that I've got. So Maria has fitters in a few countries. It is very difficult to do this to this level. You really need to be hands-on.
Jimmy, whereabouts are you?
Yeah.
Oh, USA.
There are a a couple of fitters coming on board. I can't think where the one I'm thinking of off the top of my head. I can't think where she is. What we need to be doing is talking about this and asking this of our own saddle fitters and explaining what you've seen today. Maria, particularly Maria Halring, is a force of nature, we have to say, and is very keen that we actually start looking at adopting some of this across all of saddle fitting. But it's very territorial, and you have to be incredibly diplomatic. And I'm not sure Swedish and British culture entirely marry on that front. Maria being Swedish, but this is what the saddle fitting world needs. At least some of this. Now, I'm not saying that your average saddle fitter doesn't have some understanding of this, but I tend to see more sort of empirical, is that the right word, saddle fitting, where it's let's try a few things. What do you find comfortable normally? And I will give you, this is probably our last point, but a big warning that what feels good is often what you're used to. And when I put people in a forward balanced saddle, it can feel quite scary because you have spent your entire time back here with this turned on. And as soon as I put you here, literally with less saddle in front of you, your brain is getting messages from your body that's going, I don't know what's happening, help. So even when I give you all of this stability, this optimal alignment, whatever you want to call it, functionality, your body may still lie to you, your brain will lie to you. So it's developing a relationship with a fitter where you can make sure you're working in that direction, that you can take your time and get used to things and have that discussion and work with somebody like Lisa, who will really help to get you in a place where you're ready for a forward balanced saddle or ready for a saddle that aligns you over your feet, because it's what we all want. It's what your horse wants. I can tell you that. And I did miss that last comment again.
Jamie was just saying that she would love to do this. She fits Western saddles, but English, she didn't like any of them. But she can really get behind the thinking of this.
Well, by all means, drop me a message, and we can have a chat. But yeah, this definitely needs to be rolled out. It applies to Western, it applies to every type of saddle fitting, which is why I wanted to. I've got two of my three brands, because one is the Rider Fit Specialist one is treeless and is quite different, but I can get quite a good result. But
that's hilarious. Feet are pointing out over here.
And yet this is the narrowest saddle I've sat on, and it's showing all the signs of sitting her wider.
And I'm like, ugh.
Ragdoll. And how much further back in this saddle is she from the front? Look at the gap. So although her knees are going forward, it's because she's scooted way back to try and even get on a surface that supports her seat bones. Counterintuitive, a lot of this. Well, I mean, I'm always interested in, I'm happy to do online stuff. I'm really happy to come and do in-person workshops for anybody within my area. I can't really travel beyond my area. I have a killer of an area as it is. So if you'd like anything to be put on for a riding club or for your customers, do give me a shout. I'd be delighted to show you more. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to hand back to Lisa. If anybody's got any particular questions that occur to them afterwards, do get in touch. But I'm guessing I won't be swamped with like a million inquiries, but happy to help where I can.
No, and everybody, you can find Steph on Facebook, Steph Bloom Specialist Saddle Fitter. Yeah. And I will put questions up on the group if that's easier for you, and I can certainly forward them on to Steph as well.
Yeah. And my website is stephaniebloomsaddlefitter.co.uk.
And hopefully everybody has learnt something new and different about trying to get ourselves a bit more comfortable for at least an hour a day anyway. If you're only riding one. Thank you very much. I think I had quite an international bit of flair there this evening with quite a few different countries. So it's great to have some interest, and we're planning on getting the next webinar maybe up before Christmas. So it's going to be looking at your horse's posture and exercises to help with that. So that should be really cool and interesting too. And it all ties in, all holistic.
Yeah, pulls it all together.
Yeah. super job. I'll say if you need to get in contact with Steph, do so through Facebook or through the group. And thank you all for coming and joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye bye. Thank you, Steph.